Chapter 2. "He's coming," shouted the signaller at that moment. The regimental commander, flushing, ran to his horse, seized the stirrup with trembling hands, threw his body across the saddle, righted himself, drew his sabre, and with a happy and resolute countenance, opening his mouth awry, prepared to shout. The regiment fluttered like a bird preening its plumage and became motionless. "Attention!" shouted the regimental commander in a soul-shaking voice which expressed joy for himself, severity for the regiment, and welcome for the approaching chief. Along the broad country road, edged on both sides by trees, came a high, light blue Viennese calèche, slightly creaking on its springs and drawn by 6 horses at a smart trot. Behind the calèche galloped the suite and a convoy of Croats. Beside Kutuzov sat an Austrian general, in a white uniform that looked strange among the Russian black ones. The calèche stopped in front of the regiment. Kutuzov and the Austrian general were talking in low voices, and Kutuzov smiled slightly as, treading heavily, he stepped down from the carriage, just as if those 2,000 men breathlessly gazing at him and the regimental commander did not exist. The word of command rang out, and again the regiment quivered, as with a jingling sound it presented arms. Then amidst a dead silence the feeble voice of the commander-in-chief was heard. The regiment roared, "Health to your ex. Lency," and again all became silent. At first Kutuzov stood still while the regiment moved, then he and the general in white, accompanied by the suite, walked between the ranks. From the way the regimental commander saluted the commander-in-chief and devoured him with his eyes, drawing himself up obsequiously, and from the way he walked through the ranks behind the generals, bending forward and hardly able to restrain his jerky movements, and from the way he darted forward at every word or gesture of the commander-in-chief, it was evident that he performed his duty as a subordinate with even greater zeal than his duty as a commander. Thanks to the strictness and assiduity of its commander, the regiment, in comparison with others that had reached Braunau at the same time, was in splendid condition. There were only 217 sick and stragglers. Everything was in good order except the boots. Kutuzov walked through the ranks, sometimes stopping to say a few friendly words to officers he had known in the Turkish War, sometimes also to the soldiers. Looking at their boots, he several times shook his head sadly, pointing them out to the Austrian general with an expression which seemed to say that he was not blaming anyone, but could not help noticing what a bad state of things it was. The regimental commander ran forward on each such occasion, fearing to miss a single word of the commander-in-chief's regarding the regiment. Behind Kutuzov, at a distance that allowed every softly spoken word to be heard, followed some 20 men of his suite. These gentlemen talked among themselves and sometimes laughed. Nearest of all to the commander-in-chief walked a handsome adjutant. This was Prince Bolkonsky. Beside him was his comrade Nesvitsky, a tall staff officer, extremely stout, with a kindly, smiling, handsome face and moist eyes. Nesvitsky could hardly keep from laughter provoked by a swarthy hussar officer who walked beside him. This hussar, with a grave face and without a smile or a change in the expression of his fixed eyes, watched the regimental commander's back and mimicked his every movement. Each time the commander started and bent forward, the hussar started and bent forward in exactly the same manner. Nesvitsky laughed and nudged the others to make them look at the wag. Kutuzov walked slowly and languidly past thousands of eyes which were starting from their sockets to watch their chief. On reaching the 3rd company he suddenly stopped. His suite, not having expected this, involuntarily came closer to him. "Ah, Timokhin," said he, recognizing the red-nosed captain who had been reprimanded on account of the blue greatcoat. One would have thought it impossible for a man to stretch himself more than Timokhin had done when he was reprimanded by the regimental commander, but now that the commander-in-chief addressed him he drew himself up to such an extent that it seemed he could not have sustained it had the commander-in-chief continued to look at him, and so Kutuzov, who evidently understood his case and wished him nothing but good, quickly turned away, a scarcely perceptible smile flitting over his scarred and puffy face. "Another Ismail comrade," said he. "A brave officer. Are you satisfied with him?" he asked the regimental commander. And the latter, unconscious that he was being reflected in the hussar officer as in a looking-glass, started, moved forward, and answered, "Highly satisfied, Your Excellency." "We all have our weaknesses," said Kutuzov, smiling and walking away from him. He used to have a predilection for Bacchus. The regimental commander was afraid he might be blamed for this and did not answer. The hussar at that moment noticed the face of the red-nosed captain and his drawn-in stomach, and mimicked his expression and pose with such exactitude that Nesvitsky could not help laughing. Kutuzov turned round. The officer evidently had complete control of his face, and while Kutuzov was turning managed to make a grimace and then assume a most serious, deferential, and innocent expression. The third company was the last, and Kutuzov pondered, apparently trying to recollect something. Prince Andrew stepped forward from among the suite and said in French, "You told me to remind you of the officer Dólokhov, reduced to the ranks in this regiment." "Where is Dólokhov?" asked Kutuzov. Dólokhov, who had already changed into a soldier's grey greatcoat, did not wait to be called. The shapely figure of the fair-haired soldier, with his clear blue eyes, stepped forward from the ranks, went up to the commander-in-chief, and presented arms. "Have you a complaint to make?" Kutuzov asked with a slight frown. "This is Dólokhov," said Prince Andrew. "Ah," said Kutuzov. "I hope this will be a lesson to you. Do your duty. The Emperor is gracious, and I shan't forget you if you deserve well." The clear blue eyes looked at the commander-in-chief just as boldly as they had looked at the regimental commander, seeming by their expression to tear open the veil of convention that separates a commander-in-chief so widely from a private. "One thing I ask of your Excellency," Dólokhov said in his firm, ringing, deliberate voice. "I ask an opportunity to atone for my fault and prove my devotion to His Majesty the Emperor and to Russia." Kutuzov turned away. The same smile of the eyes with which he had turned from Captain Timokhin again flitted over his face. He turned away with a grimace as if to say that everything Dólokhov had said to him and everything he could say had long been known to him, that he was weary of it and it was not at all what he wanted. He turned away and went to the carriage. The regiment broke up into companies, which went to their appointed quarters near Braunau, where they hoped to receive boots and clothes and to rest after their hard marches. "You won't bear me a grudge, Prokhor Ignatych," said the regimental commander, overtaking the third company on its way to its quarters and riding up to Captain Timokhin who was walking in front. The regimental commander's face now that the inspection was happily overbeamed with irrepressible delight. "It's in the Emperor's service, it can't be helped, one is sometimes a bit hasty on parade. I am the first to apologize, you know me." He was very pleased. And he held out his hand to the captain. "Don't mention it, General, as if I'd be so bold," replied the captain, his nose growing redder as he gave a smile which showed where two front teeth were missing that had been knocked out by the butt end of a gun at Ismail. "And tell Mr. Dólokhov that I won't forget him, he may be quite easy. And tell me, please, I've been meaning to ask, how is he behaving himself, and in general?" "As far as the service goes he is quite punctilious, Your Excellency, but his character," said Timokhin. "And what about his character?" asked the regimental commander. "It's different on different days," answered the captain. "One day he is sensible, well-educated, and good-natured, and the next he's a wild beast. In Poland, if you please, he nearly killed a Jew." "Oh, well, well," remarked the regimental commander. "Still, one must have pity on a young man in misfortune. You know he has important connections. Well, then, you just—" "I will, Your Excellency," said Timokhin, showing by his smile that he understood his commander's wish. "Well, of course, of course." The regimental commander sought out Dólokhov in the ranks and, reining in his horse, said to him, "After the next affair, epaulets." Dólokhov looked round but did not say anything, nor did the mocking smile on his lips change. "Well, that's all right," continued the regimental commander. "A cup of vodka for the men from me," he added so that the soldiers could hear. "I thank you all. God be praised," and he rode past that company and overtook the next one. "Well, he's really a good fellow, one can serve under him," said Timokhin to the subaltern beside him. "In a word, a hearty one," said the subaltern, laughing. The regimental commander was nicknamed King of Hearts. The cheerful mood of their officers after the inspection infected the soldiers. The company marched on gaily. The soldiers' voices could be heard on every side. And they said Kutuzov was blind of one eye. And so he is. Quite blind. No, friend, he is sharper-eyed than you are. Boots and leg bands, he noticed everything. When he looked at my feet, friend, well, thinks I. And that other one with him, the Austrian, looked as if he were smeared with chalk, as white as flour. I suppose they polish him up as they do the guns. I say, Fedoshan. Did he say when the battles are to begin? You were near him. Everybody said that Bonaparte himself was at Braunau. Bonaparte himself. Just listen to the fool, what he doesn't know. The Prussians are up in arms now. The Austrians, you see, are putting them down. When they've been put down, the war with Bonaparte will begin. And he says Bonaparte is in Braunau. Shows you're a fool. You'd better listen more carefully. What devils these quartermasters are. See, the 5th Company is turning into the village already, they will have their buckwheat cooked before we reach our quarters. Give me a biscuit, you devil. And did you give me tobacco yesterday? That's just it, friend. Ah, well, never mind, here you are. They might call a halt here or we'll have to do another 4 miles without eating. Wasn't it fine when those Germans gave us lifts? You just sit still and are drawn along. And here, friend, the people are quite beggarly. There they all seem to be Poles, all under the Russian crown, but here they're all regular Germans. Singers to the front, came the captain's order. And from the different ranks some 20 men ran to the front. A drummer, their leader, turned round facing the singers, and flourishing his arm, began a long drawn-out soldier's song, commencing with the words, "Morning dawned, the sun was rising," and concluding, "On then, brothers, on to glory," led by Father Kamensky. This song had been composed in the Turkish campaign and now being sung in Austria, the only change being that the words, Father Kamensky, were replaced by, Father Kutuzov. Having jerked out these last words as soldiers do and waved his arms as if flinging something to the ground, the drummer, a lean, handsome soldier of 40, looked sternly at the singers and screwed up his eyes. Then having satisfied himself that all eyes were fixed on him, he raised both arms as if carefully lifting some invisible but precious object above his head and, holding it there for some seconds, suddenly flung it down and began. "Oh, my bower, oh, my bower. Oh, my bower new," chimed in 20 voices, and the castanet player, in spite of the burden of his equipment, rushed out to the front and, walking backwards before the company, jerked his shoulders and flourished his castanets as if threatening someone. The soldiers, swinging their arms and keeping time spontaneously, marched with long steps. Behind the company the sound of wheels, the creaking of springs, and the tramp of horses' hoofs were heard. Kutuzov and his suite were returning to the town. The commander-in-chief made a sign that the men should continue to march at ease, and he and all his suite showed pleasure at the sound of the singing and the sight of the dancing soldier and the gay and smartly marching men. In the second file from the right flank, beside which the carriage passed the company, a blue-eyed soldier involuntarily attracted notice. It was Dólokhov marching with particular grace and boldness in time to the song and looking at those driving past as if he pitied all who were not at that moment marching with the company. The hussar cornet of Kutuzov's suite who had mimicked the regimental commander, fell back from the carriage and rode up to Dólokhov. Hussar cornet Zherkov had at one time, in Petersburg, belonged to the wild set led by Dólokhov. Zherkov had met Dólokhov abroad as a private and had not seen fit to recognize him. But now that Kutuzov had spoken to the gentleman ranker, he addressed him with the cordiality of an old friend. "My dear fellow, how are you?" said he through the singing, making his horse keep pace with the company. "How am I?" Dólokhov answered coldly. "I am as you see." The lively song gave a special flavor to the tone of free and easy gaiety with which Zherkov spoke, and to the intentional coldness of Dólokhov's reply. "And how do you get on with the officers?" inquired Zherkov. "All right. They are good fellows." "And how have you wriggled onto the staff?" "I was attached, I'm on duty." Both were silent. She let the hawk fly upward from her wide right sleeve, went the song, arousing an involuntary sensation of courage and cheerfulness. Their conversation would probably have been different but for the effect of that song. "Is it true that Austrians have been beaten?" asked Dólokhov. "The devil only knows. They say so." "I'm glad," answered Dólokhov briefly and clearly, as the song demanded. "I say, come round some evening and we'll have a game of faro," said Zherkov. "Why, have you too much money?" "Do come." "I can't. I've sworn not to. I won't drink and won't play till I get reinstated." "Well, that's only till the first engagement." "We shall see." They were again silent. "Come if you need anything. One can at least be of use on the staff." Dólokhov smiled. "Don't trouble. If I want anything, I won't beg, I'll take it." "Well, never mind, I only. And I only. Goodbye. Good health. It's a long, long way. To my native land." Zherkov touched his horse with the spurs. It pranced excitedly from foot to foot, uncertain with which to start, then settled down, galloped past the company, and overtook the carriage, still keeping time to the song. Chapter 3. On returning from the review, Kutuzov took the Austrian general into his private room and, calling his adjutant, asked for some papers relating to the condition of the troops on their arrival, and the letters that had come from the Archduke Ferdinand, who was in command of the advanced army. Prince Andrew Bolkonsky came into the room with the required papers. Kutuzov and the Austrian member of the Hofkriegsrath were sitting at the table on which a plan was spread out. "Ah," said Kutuzov, glancing at Bolkonsky as if by this exclamation he was asking the adjutant to wait, and he went on with the conversation in French. "All I can say, General," said he with a pleasant elegance of expression and intonation that obliged one to listen to each deliberately spoken word. It was evident that Kutuzov himself listened with pleasure to his own voice. "All I can say, General, is that if the matter depended on my personal wishes, the will of His Majesty the Emperor Francis would have been fulfilled long ago. I should long ago have joined the Archduke. And believe me on my honor that to me personally it would be a pleasure to hand over the supreme command of the army into the hands of a better informed and more skillful general, of whom Austria has so many, and to lay down all this heavy responsibility. But circumstances are sometimes too strong for us, General." And Kutuzov smiled in a way that seemed to say, "You are quite at liberty not to believe me, and I don't even care whether you do or not, but you have no grounds for telling me so. And that is the whole point." The Austrian general looked dissatisfied, but had no option but to reply in the same tone. "On the contrary," he said, in a querulous and angry tone that contrasted with his flattering words, "on the contrary, Your Excellency's participation in the common action is highly valued by His Majesty, but we think the present delay is depriving the splendid Russian troops and their commander of the laurels they have been accustomed to win in their battles." He concluded his evidently prearranged sentence. Kutuzov bowed with the same smile. "But that is my conviction, and judging by the last letter with which His Highness the Archduke Ferdinand has honored me, I imagine that the Austrian troops, under the direction of so skillful a leader as General Mack, have by now already gained a decisive victory and no longer need our aid," said Kutuzov. The general frowned. Though there was no definite news of an Austrian defeat, there were many circumstances confirming the unfavorable rumors that were afloat, and so Kutuzov's suggestion of an Austrian victory sounded much like irony. But Kutuzov went on blandly smiling with the same expression, which seemed to say that he had a right to suppose so. And, in fact, the last letter he had received from Mack's army informed him of a victory and stated strategically the position of the army was very favorable. "Give me that letter," said Kutuzov, turning to Prince Andrew. "Please have a look at it," and Kutuzov with an ironical smile about the corners of his mouth read to the Austrian general the following passage, in German, from the Archduke Ferdinand's letter. "We have fully concentrated forces of nearly 70,000 men with which to attack and defeat the enemy should he cross the Lech. Also, as we are masters of Ulm, we cannot be deprived of the advantage of commanding both sides of the Danube, so that should the enemy not cross the Lech, we can cross the Danube, throw ourselves on his line of communications, recross the river lower down, and frustrate his intentions should he try to direct his whole force against our faithful ally. We shall therefore confidently await the moment when the Imperial Russian army will be fully equipped, and shall then, in conjunction with it, easily find a way to prepare for the enemy the fate he deserves. Kutuzov sighed deeply on finishing this paragraph and looked at the member of the Hofkriegsrath mildly and attentively. But you know the wise maxim, Your Excellency, advising one to expect the worst, said the Austrian general, evidently wishing to have done with jests and to come to business. He involuntarily looked round at the aide-de-camp. "Excuse me, General," interrupted Kutuzov, also turning to Prince Andrew. "Look here, my dear fellow, get from Kozlovsky all the reports from our scouts. Here are 2 letters from Count Nostitz and here is one from His Highness the Archduke Ferdinand and here are these," he said, handing him several papers. "Make a neat memorandum in French out of all this, showing all the news we have had of the movements of the Austrian army, and then give it to His Excellency." Prince Andrew bowed his head in token of having understood from the first not only what had been said but also what Kutuzov would have liked to tell him. He gathered up the papers and with a bow to both, stepped softly over the carpet and went out into the waiting room. Though not much time had passed since Prince Andrew had left Russia, he had changed greatly during that period. In the expression of his face, in his movements, in his walk, scarcely a trace was left of his former affected languor and indolence. He now looked like a man who has time to think of the impression he makes on others, but is occupied with agreeable and interesting work. His face expressed more satisfaction with himself and those around him, his smile and glance were brighter and more attractive. Kutuzov, whom he had overtaken in Poland, had received him very kindly, promised not to forget him, distinguished him above the other adjutants, and had taken him to Vienna and given him the more serious commissions. From Vienna Kutuzov wrote to his old comrade, Prince Andrew's father. "Your son bids fair to become an officer distinguished by his industry, firmness, and expedition. I consider myself fortunate to have such a subordinate by me." On Kutuzov's staff, among his fellow officers and in the army generally, Prince Andrew had, as he had had in Petersburg society, 2 quite opposite reputations. Some, a minority, acknowledged him to be different from themselves and from everyone else, expected great things of him, listened to him, admired, and imitated him, and with them Prince Andrew was natural and pleasant. Others, the majority, disliked him and considered him conceited, cold, and disagreeable. But among these people Prince Andrew knew how to take his stand so that they respected and even feared him. Coming out of Kutuzov's room into the waiting room with the papers in his hand, Prince Andrew came up to his comrade, the aide-de-camp on duty, Kozlovsky, who was sitting at the window with a book. "Well, Prince?" asked Kozlovsky. "I am ordered to write a memorandum explaining why we are not advancing." "And why is it?" Prince Andrew shrugged his shoulders. "Any news from Mack?" "No. If it were true that he has been beaten, news would have come." "Probably," said Prince Andrew moving toward the outer door. But at that instant a tall Austrian general in a greatcoat, with the Order of Maria Theresa on his neck and a black bandage round his head, who had evidently just arrived, entered quickly, slamming the door. Prince Andrew stopped short. "Commander-in-Chief Kutuzov," said the newly arrived general speaking quickly with a harsh German accent, looking to both sides and advancing straight toward the inner door. "The commander-in-chief is engaged," said Kozlovsky, going hurriedly up to the unknown general and blocking his way to the door. "Whom shall I announce?" The unknown general looked disdainfully down at Kozlovsky, who was rather short, as if surprised that anyone should not know him. "The commander-in-chief is engaged," repeated Kozlovsky calmly. The general's face clouded, his lips quivered and trembled. He took out a notebook, hurriedly scribbled something in pencil, tore out the leaf, gave it to Kozlovsky, stepped quickly to the window, and threw himself into a chair, gazing at those in the room as if asking, "Why do they look at me?" Then he lifted his head, stretched his neck as if he intended to say something, but immediately, with affected indifference, began to hum to himself, producing a queer sound which immediately broke off. The door of the private room opened and Kutuzov appeared in the doorway. The general with the bandaged head bent forward as though running away from some danger, and, making long, quick strides with his thin legs, went up to Kutuzov. "Vous voyez le malheureux Mack," he uttered in a broken voice. Kutuzov's face as he stood in the open doorway remained perfectly immobile for a few moments. Then wrinkles ran over his face like a wave and his forehead became smooth again. He bowed his head respectfully, closed his eyes, silently let Mack enter his room before him, and closed the door himself behind him. The report which had been circulated that the Austrians had been beaten and that the whole army had surrendered at Ulm proved to be correct. Within half an hour adjutants had been sent in various directions with orders which showed that the Russian troops, who had hitherto been inactive, would also soon have to meet the enemy. Prince Andrew was one of those rare staff officers whose chief interest lay in the general progress of the war. When he saw Mack and heard the details of his disaster he understood that half the campaign was lost, understood all the difficulties of the Russian army's position, and vividly imagined what awaited it and the part he would have to play. Involuntarily he felt a joyful agitation at the thought of the humiliation of arrogant Austria and that in a week's time he might, perhaps, see and take part in the first Russian encounter with the French since Suvorov met them. He feared that Bonaparte's genius might outweigh all the courage of the Russian troops, and at the same time could not admit the idea of his hero being disgraced. Excited and irritated by these thoughts Prince Andrew went toward his room to write to his father, to whom he wrote every day. In the corridor he met Nesvitsky, with whom he shared a room, and the wag Zherkov. They were as usual laughing. "Why are you so glum?" asked Nesvitsky noticing Prince Andrew's pale face and glittering eyes. "There's nothing to be gay about," answered Bolkonsky. Just as Prince Andrew met Nesvitsky and Zherkov, there came toward them from the other end of the corridor, Strauch, an Austrian general who was on Kutuzov's staff in charge of the provisioning of the Russian army, and a member of the Hofkriegsrath who had arrived the previous evening. There was room enough in the wide corridor for the generals to pass the three officers quite easily, but Zherkov, pushing Nesvitsky aside with his arm, said in a breathless voice. "They're coming. They're coming. Stand aside, make way, please make way." The generals were passing by, looking as if they wished to avoid embarrassing attentions. On the face of the wag Zherkov there suddenly appeared a stupid smile of glee which he seemed unable to suppress. "Your Excellency," said he in German, stepping forward and addressing the Austrian general, "I have the honor to congratulate you." He bowed his head and scraped first with one foot and then with the other, awkwardly, like a child at a dancing lesson. The member of the Hofkriegsrath looked at him severely but, seeing the seriousness of his stupid smile, could not but give him a moment's attention. He screwed up his eyes showing that he was listening. "I have the honor to congratulate you. General Mack has arrived, quite well, only a little bruised just here," he added, pointing with a beaming smile to his head. The general frowned, turned away, and went on. "Gott, wie naive!" Said he angrily, after he had gone a few steps. Good God, what simplicity! Nesvitsky with a laugh threw his arms round Prince Andrew, but Bolkonsky, turning still paler, pushed him away with an angry look and turned to Zherkov. The nervous irritation aroused by the appearance of Mack, the news of his defeat, and the thought of what lay before the Russian army found vent in anger at Zherkov's untimely jest. "If you, sir, choose to make a buffoon of yourself," he said sharply, with a slight trembling of the lower jaw, "I can't prevent your doing so, but I warn you that if you dare to play the fool in my presence, I will teach you to behave yourself." Nesvitsky and Zherkov were so surprised by this outburst that they gazed at Bolkonsky silently with wide-open eyes. "What's the matter?" "I only congratulated them," said Zherkov. "I am not jesting with you, please be silent," cried Bolkonsky, and taking Nesvitsky's arm he left Zherkov, who did not know what to say. "Come, what's the matter, old fellow?" said Nesvitsky trying to soothe him. "What's the matter?" exclaimed Prince Andrew standing still in his excitement. "Don't you understand that either we are officers serving our Tsar and our country, rejoicing in the successes and grieving at the misfortunes of our common cause, or we are merely lackeys who care nothing for their master's business? 40 000 hommes massacres et l'armée de nos alliés détruite, et vous trouvez la loyauté pour rire," he said, as if strengthening his views by this French sentence. "C'est bien pour un garçon de reine comme cet individu dont vous avez fait un ami, mais pas pour vous, pas pour vous." Asterisk, 2, only a hobbledehoy could amuse himself in this way, he added in Russian, but pronouncing the word with a French accent, having noticed that Zherkov could still hear him. Asterisk, 40,000 men massacred and the army of our allies destroyed, and you find that a cause for jesting. Asterisk, 2, it is all very well for that good-for-nothing fellow of whom you have made a friend, but not for you, not for you. He waited a moment to see whether the cornet would answer, but he turned and went out of the corridor.